Hello, my name is Amy Wood. I'm the executive director of the Raymond A. Wood Foundation. And today we're talking about IEPs as we're getting ready for back to school. And I have with me today Katy Bosserman, who has taught special education for 20 years in the Maryland public school system. She currently serves as a special education advocate, where she helps families navigate the IEP process. Katy has tips to share on preparing for back to school IEP team meetings, as well as helping your child transition back to school, whether in person, virtual, or hybrid. So, Katy, thank you so much for being with us today and welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to the families. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be here.
Let me start off with a question. So our main audience is pituitary brain tumor, hypothalamic pituitary brain tumor survivors, many of them pediatrics. A lot of caregivers will be tuning into this. And our kids tend to have both complex medical conditions and cognitive issues, learning and behavioral challenges. What are some of the things parents can do to help the IEP team understand the complexity of these situations?
One thing that families can do is they can put together something called an All About Me book, or they can generate an email to the school. And in that book or in that email, if you want to do a book, you can take a picture of your child and put it on the front, put the name of your child on the front, and write, all about me. And you should include a general introduction, learning strategies, therapy strategies, information about behaviors, information about sensory regulation, executive planning, social interaction, and any kind of medical condition that your child might have. So if you wanted to get more specific, you could include things like physical therapy progress, speech and language therapy progress, occupational therapy progress, social and pragmatic skills, sensory regulation ideas, executive and planning strategies. And the idea behind this is, because we've been in a situation for the last year and a half in COVID, and school has looked quite different. A lot of families have been working with their children at home, and parents tend to know a lot more about what's going on with their kids than the staff at a school might know going into the 2021-22 school year. So this is an opportunity for you as a parent to be able to share with the school what progress or lack of progress your child has made in these areas. So what you want to do is provide enough information that the staff are able to just take that information and jump right into the learning process with your child and begin implementing his or her IEP effectively. For the introduction, you would want to consider the following. Hi, my name is, I am in whatever grade, I live with my favorite activities are, my favorite sports are. I am also really into, my favorite part of school is, my least favorite part of school is, my disability or disabilities are called. I describe my disability like this. Again, if your child has a medically fragile condition, this is a time when you could go into a little more detail about that. Make the teacher more aware of what the condition is. I would also recommend that you suggest to the teacher and/or the case manager of your child at the school that any kind of a meeting that you decide to have, whether it's formal or informal, you would want to have the nurse be in attendance at that meeting. Then the other thing that you can do, if in addition to the book or the email, is generate another email, like a back to school email. And you would want to send this in probably ahead of school starting. You would describe how your child is doing with toileting, or what the pediatrician said at your last appointment, or maybe a change in medication, or a new behavior strategy that seems to be working, or any new behavior and how you're addressing them. If teachers get that information at the beginning of the year, they can hit the ground running and really understand your child. This is key to a great transition in understanding your child. It's good when children are aware that their teachers understand them and know their interests, their profiles, and are interested in what they're interested in. The students, your teacher, the teacher of your child is going to respond a lot better to your child if they have this information. It also makes children feel safe, and when they feel safe, they're prepared to learn. And we all know this has been a very scary time for not only the kids, but us as adults. As we transition back to school, a lot of children might feel unsafe. They might feel unsettled. They might experience all different kinds of feelings that inhibit their learning. So the more that teachers can understand about the children, the more prepared the children are going to be to learn. You might include a progress update, medical information, and maybe a little bit about what your child did over the summer. Also activities that he or she participated in, new interests, and some social notes if you think that might be helpful. Teachers can utilize this information. That's why it's helpful to communicate. They can also share it with other staff in the building.
Question, I just wanted to follow up, but that's great. Thank you so much. And I just want to follow up with a question. These all about me or any kind of email generate, it's simply parent observations, or should parents be obtaining reports from the sources that may have been teaching or seeing the child maybe through the summer or prior, or is it really just parent observations?
No, that's a really good question. I mean, it can be a combination of both. It can be a combination of parent observation, and yes, definitely any updated progress reports would be essential to the information that you would be providing. I think, you know, you could do it one of two ways. You could make a general statement within the context of either the All About Me book or the email that you send, or you could, and then you could follow that up with, hey, I'd like to schedule an informal meeting or a formal meeting, whatever you feel is more pertinent for your situation, to discuss some of the progress that was made and how that pertains to the actual IEP itself, and whether you may need to come back to the table and tweak the IEP and change a few accommodations, supplementary aids, or maybe even goals.
Great, thank you. So in our community, many of our kids, depending on their ongoing issues, are considered high risk and are under the age of vaccination at this time. So there's probably a good group of parents that are facing some continuing online learning, virtual learning until vaccinations are available and the Delta variant settles a bit. So any advice for parents as they go into maybe another round of virtual learning?
My advice would be, first of all, if you know of a way to do some, get yourself 5 or 10 minutes in the morning before you even start your day to just have some calm and time to reflect and maybe meditate and do some deep breathing, I would strongly suggest doing that. But in addition to that, I think it's really helpful to pull the goals and objectives from your child's IEP and take a look at what the specific goals are and each objective underneath that goal, and maybe take some index cards, and in a very general way, like if they're working on sight words, you could write down on the index card sight words. If they're working on counting numbers to 50, you could write that down. So you wouldn't have to write every single detail of the objective, but just in general, what you would want to be working on. And then you could take the index cards and you could punch a hole in the corner and you could put one of those little metal rings on there, and then just take a magnetic hook and find a place on the refrigerator and just put those on the magnetic hook. So the idea is that what you're going to do is then gather tools to be able to work on those goals with your child. Obviously, you all are parents of your children. A lot of you, most of you probably didn't go to school to learn how to be teachers. But if you have the right tools, and I would also encourage you to get with the staff at school, whoever the case manager is, maybe send an email and say, hey, we're working on this. What kind of tools might you suggest that we could use to work on this particular objective? And then once you have those, what you want to do is maybe have like a little tiered cart that you would place your items in. And that way, in the cart, you can have it and you can wheel it wherever you need to wheel it within the house. You can just kind of push it out of the way and then bring it out when you need it. So you have your child's goals on the refrigerator 1 day a week. You grab the things that you need to work on the goals. That way, when you stick something in the oven that maybe needs 15 minutes to bake, you have 15 minutes where you can work with your child on that goal. If you don't have the goals out and you don't have the stuff out to work on, then you're going to be using that 15 minutes to figure out what to do. So if you have flashcards, a couple of worksheets, markers, pencils, manipulatives, a ruler, and play money, all in one specific spot in your house where you can keep it out of the way, you can grab a couple of things and say, hey, buddy, we're going to work on this while we wait for dinner to bake. This way you don't have to think or organize anything. You don't have to get anything ready. It's already there to use. So number 3, number 4 that I just talked about, they go together. 3 is write your goals and put them someplace so that you remember what they are. And 4 is set up tools to work on those.
Great. And you have crafted a really lovely set of 7 tips that we'll also be sharing in the notes of this. But yeah, that's great advice. So this is a common question I see pop up a lot, especially for people with kids that are maybe newly diagnosed and treated and returning to school. Can you help us understand the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan? When does maybe a child need one or the other?
So the difference between a 504 and an IEP is it's actually fairly simple. A 504 plan is a plan that's put in place for a student who, like a lot of the students, the children whose parents are going to be viewing this video, might be medically fragile, and so they need a particular accommodation in the classroom. For instance, this is all that's coming to mind right now, but I know years ago, most schools today are air conditioned, but there are a few left that are not air conditioned. And so I do remember there were times when if the student had really bad asthma and they needed to be in a room that had air conditioning, especially in the warmer months of the year, there would be a 504 accommodation that would be put in place. A 504 plan would be put in place for that student to receive that in the classroom. So it wouldn't be, a 504 is an accommodation. It's not a specific goal or an objective or even a supplementary aid. It's an accommodation that the student needs that otherwise they wouldn't be able to access the general education curriculum without it. Some students need things like math manipulatives in math class. That could be another accommodation that would be on a 504 plan. But when you're looking at an individual education plan, that is a plan that's put in place for a student who needs specific, structured organized, systematic instruction in a particular area. Say it's in reading, decoding. So the student is maybe able to comprehend what's being read to them, but they're not able to adequately decode. And so they're at a disadvantage because they're maybe 2 years behind their peers in their ability to be able to do that. So they would need to have a specific IEP put in place with goals for decoding. In addition to that, they would also have accommodations and supplementary aids on that IEP. So it's also a document that's the individual education plan is driven by procedural safeguards, and the 504 plan is not. The 504 plan falls under the umbrella of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the IEP falls under the umbrella of IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
So just a quick follow-up question to that. For example, so a lot of kids that have had these tumors have slow processing speed and need more time.
Mhm.
Would that be covered by 504 as an accommodation, or that's more of an IEP?
For instance, if the student is slow to process, but if they're given the additional time, they're able to comprehend, they're able to do the assignment, then they would only need a 504 plan. But if the student is slow to process and they're a couple of years behind their peers in that particular subject, then they might need some specific goals and objectives on an IEP to address that.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So if families are struggling to even get an IEP in place or to get IEP teams to understand the complexities of these conditions that might require some out of the box thinking, like abbreviated school days because of fatigue, for example, what can parents do to kind of help the IEP teams understand and to sort of think outside the box, particularly for kids?
To piggyback off of what I talked about earlier with the goals and the CART and putting tools together to work on the goals. Another thing that you would want to do is you would want to track the progress that your child is making. So you could use that as part of your argument when you come to the table, especially after this last year, because if you are keeping track of the progress or lack of progress that your child is making on those goals, and you've got your data set up in such a way, maybe you can come up with some kind of a spreadsheet or even just a simple grid where you just have like 4 boxes and you generate the progress of each of the goals in the 4 boxes, but the idea is to keep track. So you would put a date, you would indicate, depending on what it says on the IEP, if it's that Johnny will do the activity 3 out of 4 times with 80% accuracy, then you would want to be marking in plus or minus and generating dates to track that progress. Then when you come back to the table to talk to the team about a modified school day, you can say to them, I would also indicate the time of day that it was done and how much time it took for your child to do that activity. Because every child is going to be different in what they can handle. And when you look at a regular school day is set up and designed for typically developing kids. And so our kiddos are, students that are not typically developing. And if they do fatigue easily, then they're going to need to have some modifications made. And there's a way to make those modifications that may not compromise the integrity of the concepts that the student is actually learning. For instance, it may be that if you decide to modify the day, you might also decide to modify the workload. So if you're working on some concepts in math and you're giving this typically developing kids 10 problems to do, you might give Johnny only 5 problems to do. Because he's still working on the same concept. You're just not overwhelming him with that much more to have to toil over.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been hearing a little bit about COVID compensatory services. So can you explain that a little bit? What does it mean, and what should be the expectation for those services?
Sure. So, okay. So the idea of, again, of tracking the progress is really important, because when you as a parent come back to the table and have a conversation with the teams, IEP teams at schools should be setting up those meetings. And if for some reason your school is not setting that meeting up, I mean, a lot of them in the county I'm in Hartford County, they set those meetings up in the spring for some students. And we had conversations about it last spring. And we were actually able to get some things put into place where students were going to be getting additional hours of service above and beyond the service hours that are in their IEP. It's all based on the progress or lack of progress that the student made. And it's separate from extended school year services. It's a separate entity from ESY.
Is it required that the schools offer it, or if parents have not heard of it, but they have kids that are in special ed kids with IEPs, is it something they should be requesting?
Yes, absolutely. Parents should be requesting it. And all you have to do is reach out to your case manager in an email, very brief email stating that you wish to have a meeting with the IEP team to discuss the possibility of compensatory services. And if you have been tracking the data and you do have that progress in your own notes that you've been keeping on your child, that's even better, because you can let them know in the email that you will be bringing with you some progress data of your own that you've been taking, which is hugely helpful.
Are there any specific tools that parents could refer to for data capture?
So what I would suggest parents do is go to the website for their state. For instance, in the state that we're in Maryland, you can go to the Maryland State Department of Education and you can actually look up tracking tools for goals, and anybody can access the tracking tools. And these are data collection tracking tools that I always encourage special educators and members of teams to use if they're not already using them. I mean, they're great tools. They've already been generated. You can download them. The other thing you can do is literally go into Microsoft Word, and you can go into templates and you can look up data collection tool, and then just take whatever idea comes up and tweak it and make it your own. I would keep it as simple as possible. I mean, even something as simple as literally, if you're not very computer savvy, just taking a sheet of paper and breaking it down into 4 quadrants, and then putting speech therapy progress, reading progress, occupational therapy progress, and physical therapy progress, and keeping track of it that way, because what you're doing, and just at the top, put for IEP year 20, 21, 22, or whatever year, your IEP is for. A lot of them right now that we're working off of, I think, are probably 2021, because I know several students are going to be coming back to meetings in October, November for their annual reviews. But again, this is information that you can take, to the annual review, and you can if you have to, you can debate with the team. I beg to differ because the progress I collected said this, and parents are the most important member of the team. They are an integral part of that team. And again, those of you who've been working with your children this past year know a lot more about what's going on than the school does.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to add or any other comments or thoughts?
The importance of writing down a schedule to get your child prepared for the transition back, whether it's a transition back to the kitchen table where you're going to be doing your work, or you might be going back hybrid, for a brief period of time, but really to help your child to get ready for that transition, especially if they haven't been in over a year. It's going to be a daunting task at best. You might even think about setting up a time with the school to go in and actually take a tour when, during the week when teachers go back to school. Or you could also, depending on what your child responds to, you could make the schedule like a visual schedule, or you can write it out, but it would be like whatever you do in the very beginning of the day, starting with getting dressed for school and having your breakfast, to whether you're being taken by car to school or you're catching the bus. Lastly, physically, as I said before, take them to school to meet their teacher and see their room. This is always helpful. If your child's going to a new school, if they seem to be anxious, then simply call the school and ask, because teachers are almost always at school, especially this time of the year. And I think this could really help make the transition back smoother for you and your child. And lastly, I just want to say that I hope everyone has a positive start to the school year. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. You just want to consult a little bit about the new school year, IEP, accommodations, anything.
How can someone reach you if they want to talk with you?
Sure, they can reach me. I have a website. It's www.creativelearningexperiences.com. And that's all one word, creative learning experiences.
You're a special education advocate. So maybe just really briefly, where do you come in, or when should somebody maybe seek the help from an advocate?
Sure. So I typically come in, there are a myriad of different ways that I might come into the picture. Often parents will call me if their child is getting ready to qualify as a student with a disability. They've just been tested and they're going to have a team meeting with the school, and they've been told that they might get an IEP, they might not get an IEP. Their child might have a disability, they might not. So they ask me to come in and work with them and help them to navigate their way through the process. Often I help parents to better understand what the testing results mean. I am able to come in and sit in on meetings and answer questions or ask questions that parents might not always think to ask, because it can be very overwhelming a scenario, as you well know, to go in and be sitting at this table with maybe 8, 10, or 12 other people. And they're talking about your child. And as a parent, often parents tell me they feel very helpless and very hopeless because they feel like they're being talked over instead of somebody having a conversation with them. And so what I try to do is I try to kind of bring everybody at the table together and answer or ask the questions that need to be asked, and And explain the contents of the IEP to the parents too, because that can be very confusing, what all of the different sections of the IEP mean. When school is in session, I have gone in and done actual observations in the classroom to look to see if supplementary aids and accommodations are actually being implemented with fidelity in the classroom. I've gone into reading groups to see if the reading instruction is being done in the correct way. And then I generate a report, bring it back to the team, and we have a discussion about it. And sometimes we end up making changes to the IEP as a result of that.
Great, thank you. Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with me and, sharing your insights and your expertise. This is such an important part of what we face as brain tumor caregivers and parents. So, and I know we're all sort of getting nervous about what's coming up, but we really appreciate your advice. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for asking me, inviting me.